All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of the League Express podcast. My name's Jack Kearnan, and joining me as always is the editor of League Express, Martyn Sadler. And for our listeners and viewers, Martyn, we've got a pretty special guest today.
We have, and it's David Ellis. David, welcome to the podcast. And I should just explain for our audience that David is a very eminent coach, unfortunately mainly in rugby union, although he coaches both codes and has coached both codes for many years. But David, you and I first met in the mid-1980s, didn't we, when I was the chairman of the Student Rugby League and you played for British students. And I remember one game in particular where we played the French universities and we played them in Cheltenham, of all places.
That's correct, yeah.
And did we win that game? I can't remember now. I think it was a tight game, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was a really tight game.
Yeah. And you were an aspiring player back then, 40 years ago now, unfortunately. I think we both look a bit older than we did then. And you then went on to have a playing career for several clubs, not just in England, but in Australia as well, before starting a coaching career, but a coaching career that had a sudden turn. And just tell us a little bit about that sort of background of yours.
Well, yes, yeah. I think I played 3 consecutive years with Great Britain students. I think in '83 we played at Scarborough.
Yeah.
And then '84 we played out in Villeneuve in France, and '85 at Cheltenham football stadium. And then I was playing. My playing career took me from Castleford as a young teenager, continued to Keighley, and then to Doncaster, and then later on in my career at Batley as well, and odd spells.
Yes.
Odd spells at Dewsbury and Hunslet.
But you did have some time in Australia, didn't you, as well?
That's right, yeah. I spent 4 years playing in Australia. Yeah. Initially it was up in Townsville, in the North Queensland, but just one season because the weather was a bit too warm for me.
Too hot, too sticky, too humid.
Yeah, and then spent several years down in Toowoomba, which was a bit cooler.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
I always say when we have an Aussie on the podcast, we've had a few people from Toowoomba on the podcast. I was born in Toowoomba.
That almost seems to be a qualification, doesn't it?
Yeah,
you must have had something to do with Toowoomba.
That's it. But yeah, it's just such a strong rugby league community down in Toowoomba, so and the competition was great.
I had a really good opportunity. I played for the Clydesdales when I was there as well, which was really good, having played for North Queensland, the previous season. So and because the big thing there was the State League, you played in the State League, which you'll know, and then you played in them days against Wally Lewis and Gene Miles and all the Queensland Origin players.
Gosh, that's pretty awe-inspiring, isn't it? Really?
Yeah.
I was going to say, what did you make of the Toowoomba winters? People they often complain it gets really cold, but I guess coming from over here, it probably wasn't that bad for you.
I loved it because it get really cold on the night, and then you get nice warm days. Yeah, it was just perfect for a guy from Yorkshire.
And I guess a lot better than Townsville heat, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Did you ever have any spells in Union as a player, mate, or did that come later with your coaching?
No. I played a little bit when I was younger. I just like playing. I love playing rugby league, but also if we didn't have a game of rugby league on a weekend, I'd go play rugby union as well. In a style, not a typical rugby union style.
No. But just tell us about how you first got into coaching and how you made that transition from league to union as a rugby coach. David.
I think the interesting thing with what I did as a player, I always wanted to go play for teams that had coaches that interested me. Initially, when I signed at Castleford, Malcolm Reilly was the coach, but the guy that coached me was a guy called John Sheridan,
who was renowned, wasn't he, in those days?
Just unbelievable coach, and he was probably the most important guy in my career that sort of gave me this hunger to be a coach later in life, because what he did, he was a really nice man, treated everybody with great respect, and he just made you into better players all the time. So working with John Sheridan, I'd worked with him at Castleford. I went to play at Keighley, and then because I was working in the coal mines at that time, and during the miners' strike, having to travel to Keighley backwards and forwards every week got difficult. John Sheridan was actually working at Doncaster, which was fairly close to the coal mine I was working at, and so I transferred to Doncaster mainly to play under him. And what I did with John, I was really close to him. I picked him up from his house because he couldn't drive, took him to training, and we had really good conversations. And he was probably the first mentor that I had as a coach. You know, if I was going to coach, I was going to coach like he did.
Yes, if he were alive today as a young coach, he'd be a sensation, wouldn't you, I think?
Yeah, even if he was still alive today as an old man, he'd still be a sensation. People, like I did throughout my coaching career, while he was alive, I used to go see him and spend a little bit of time with him, chat. We'd go watch games, and when I was a young coach, I'd take him to watch whichever game he wanted to watch, and it was like watching the film after you've read the book. He could see things happening on the field that hadn't happened, that were going to happen.
Yeah.
And I just thought, you know, how amazing is that?
Yeah.
You know, how much experience he's got to be able to identify them things, you know.
That is the sign of a hell of a coach, isn't it?
Yeah.
Another mentor of yours was Jack Gibson, wasn't it? I think.
That's correct, yeah.
Yeah, you actually sought him out. And
well, he actually sought me out.
Did he?
Yeah, it was during the Rugby Union World Cup in 2003. We were based up in Brisbane. You were with France at the time?
Yeah,
that's right, during the early stages of the Rugby Union World Cup. One of the journalists, a guy called Gilles Navarro, French journalist, who played for Tres Catalan with Bernard Gouache.
Right.
And he said to me, we've got a few days off now, would you want to come down? And we went down to watch the grand final in Sydney. Oh, yeah. And he introduced me to a guy called Rupert Guinness. I don't know if you've heard of Rupert. Rupert is a big journalist on cycling and things like that. And I had a chat with Rupert about my interest in rugby league, and then I got introduced to Ian Heads.
The great Ian Heads, yes.
And we ended up one day having a cup of coffee in Sydney after we'd travelled down to Sydney, and he talked to me, and it'd been in the newspapers about me being a rugby league guy and an Englishman working with the French, and they asked me who was one of my influence, and I said the major influence was John Sheridan, obviously, but from a distance was Jack Gibson. And the following morning after the World Cup semi-final defeat against England, I got a phone call, and the first thing that happened, I thought, oh no, it's press conference, and I just thought, can't do with this. So I answered the phone, and he said, tell your number 10 that he can never kick the ball too high. and Fred Michalak had been playing, and I said, okay, who's this? Oh yeah, Gibson, Jack Gibson. He said, I've heard a bit about you. Do you fancy coming to spend the day with me?
Yeah.
Brilliant! And that was it. Wow. And he and Eds had set it all up because he talked to Gibson about me, and he said, "This is a guy you need to be talking to." Even though Jack wasn't coaching in them days, but he was always interested in sort of people. So I said, "Okay." He said, "I'll send a taxi for you." And I said, "No, it'd be okay. We've got people working with us. We've got World Cup cars." So they took me. He said, "Do you think they'll know where I live?" I said, "I would imagine they'll know where you live, yeah," because he lived at Cronulla, right next to the sea and everything. Yeah. So I went down, and it was like spending the day with God. Just unbelievable.
Yeah.
We just talked about everything and nothing, and we went out for lunch, and we went out for a meal at night. And it's the first time I'd ever seen a plasma TV. He had his room. You go down some stairs into this room with a window out looking over the sea, and he had a massive plasma TV with two big leather chairs. Wow. I sat in one, he sat in the other, and we watched American football, rugby union, and rugby league, and everything. And it just
fantastic. Did you keep in touch with
him
after that?
And then we kept in touch, and we kept in touch almost every week until he went into a care home.
Yeah.
What do you think? Like, I guess everyone knows of his greatness, but after you'd met him, what do you think made him so special, I guess, as a coach, or maybe even just as a mentor? Why do you think he was able to get the best out of his teams?
Well, I think the personal thing for me is, and we talked about it, and he says people come and see me and they want the big answer to the the answer to all the questions. He says, there is no answer, he says. And I went away. When we talked about my career, and he said, and I said, I was undecided. Now I'd made it in rugby union, whether I wanted to go back to rugby league, which was, really close to my heart and everything. And Jack Gibson said, he says, you may not get the opportunity that you've got now. He says, you have to go through the fight. He says, the doors may be open for you, but you may not get the opportunity. Seize the opportunity you've got now and go with it. And that was it. And I came away, not with answers, but I came away with the knowledge that what I was doing was right, because I was doing my thing as opposed to anybody else's.
Yes.
And I think that's what the message that he passed to me. And I mean, he sort of grilled me on all subjects, on performance enhancing drugs and drugs in general, and lots of things, tactics and all the other things, and on my opinion. And what had we done? Ian Heads afterwards, when I spoke with Ian Heads, when I first arrived at Jack's house, he asked me for if I wanted a cup of coffee, and I said yes. And what he was starting with Parkinson's, and he was trembling. And he says, "How many sugars do you take in your coffee?" And I said, "Just half a spoonful." So he goes like this, he puts half a spoonful. He says to me, "It's a good job you didn't have 2 or 3, otherwise we'd have sugar everywhere." And then we went out for lunch. Oh no, he says, "Do you want another cup of coffee afterwards?" And he and Ed says, "You're staying." He said, if he didn't like you or you weren't interesting to him after the first cup of coffee, you'd have gone.
Yeah, right.
So the second cup of coffee, staying, and then it was, "Come on, we're going for lunch."
Yeah.
And then he came out with one of his liners, and one-liners, and he was taking a tyre to the garage, and he says, "Can you make that tyre look like that?" And he said, "What do you mean?" He says, "Just put air in it." And we went out for lunch, and then when we came back from lunch, I thought, what am I going to do? Am I heading home? And he just, as we pulled up in his driveway, he put his hand on my knee, and he says, "You're a guy that doesn't get too excited about things." He says, "I like that." And that was it. And that was it. I was there for the day. We spent the afternoon together. Went out for a meal at night with his daughter and his son-in-law. It was just great. And then what happened was, at the end of the day, we were watching TV, and he just fell asleep in the chair. Yeah. And his daughter came down, and that was it. Yeah. So she said, "I'll sort you a taxi out," and I went home, and he fell asleep in the chair.
Amazing.
Oh, wow.
And then we kept in touch ever since after that.
Yeah, that's fantastic, isn't it?
Yeah. So you go in and you come out knowing more about yourself and knowing that what you're doing is right. Particularly in my case, anyway.
The thing about you, David, that was quite amazing for me, at least, looking back over your career, is you never got a start in a rugby league club, did you? I think you were offered a assistant coaching job at Keighley back, I think, I don't know what year it was, early 90s, I suspect.
It was late 90s.
Late 90s, yeah. But actually, you transitioned to rugby union. Just tell us a bit about how that transition occurred, because I think rugby league has missed out on your coaching, obviously, at a high level, but whereas rugby union has benefited from having you on board. But how did that transition occur?
Well, in the early 90s, I went over to France as a player coach in Paris, and I was also coaching the French army at that time. Coached what they call the Bataillon de Joinville, because at that period of time, all the 18 to 23-year-olds had to do a minimum of 12 to 18 months national service.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So I did that. I came back and then coached MLM said for a couple of years, and then I went back over to France to coach Villeneuve, and we won the French championship. Went in 3 finals in a row, 3 grand finals in a row, and during that period of time, there was France Rugby League, the competition, the regional competition that came in just for one season, which was organised by Jack Farouk's. And then after that was the precursor to Paris Saint-Germain in Super League.
Yeah.
And so I was taken in as head coach along with Michel Mazeret, who was from Villeneuve, and we were coaches of Paris Saint-Germain during the first season. In particular, we worked for the first ever game in Super League. Once the season had finished and the powers that be decided who was going to take over the club afterwards, Farouk's left Paris Saint-Germain, and I decided, then came back to England And as you rightly say, I got offered a 3-month coaching job as assistant coach at Keighley Cougars. I told Jacques Faroux that I was going, and he said, before you make a decision, come back for the weekend. And I went back for the weekend, and he talked me into going to Rugby Union and being an assistant coach with him with Racing Club of France, which is now Racing Metro or Racing
based in
Racing
Paris.
92 in Paris.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah.
And I guess you never really looked back after that, did you? And I think that is probably what led to you being called up for the national team as well, right?
With
Like as in with
In France.
Yeah. What happened was, because Bernard Laporte had been coming to watch the Paris Saint-Germain games when we played in Paris, he was interested by the sport. He'd just taken over at Stade Francais as head coach, and in a short period of time afterwards, he was then become the national coach. Mm-hmm. So when he started looking for coaching staff, like Australia had done with John Muggleton, they'd taken him on as defence coach. England had done with Phil Larder. Bernard Laporte was looking for someone to do a similar role with the national team.
Did you speak French? I mean, that because obviously, coaching a team in an overseas country would be a lot easier if you spoke the language. But
I didn't initially, but when I went over in '92 as player coach, I started learning it as a player coach, and also my two young daughters that was at school, they were learning it, and so they taught me some of it when they came home from school.
Yeah.
And I just built myself up a dictionary of French phrases that was associated to rugby.
Yeah.
And I just built the language up from there.
Yeah.
So how long had you been coaching over there, or how long after that switch until you did get that call up for France?
12 months.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah.
That's a pretty quick to rise, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think you were with the French team for about 11 years, weren't you?
That's
altogether?
correct, yeah.
Yeah.
I started just after the Six Nations in 2000. They had a catastrophic Six Nations in 2000. I started just afterwards. And my first game was against Australia in November 2000.
But you had a lot of success in that period of time, didn't you? Multiple Six Nations
Yeah,
wins,
we won
a couple of Grand Slams, three Grand Slams?
Five Six Nations Championship, 3 Grand Slams.
Wow.
In 11 years, yeah.
And did it take you long to, I guess, adjust to the 15-a-side code, or was there a lot of similarities you could draw between the two?
Well, I think the good thing for me was that it was completely a blank canvas. Because you talk about defence in them days in French rugby union, and people think it's speaking a foreign language.
Yeah.
All it was with them is they'll score more tries than the opposition, and when you go in and say, listen, when we haven't got the ball, what we're going to do? And it was just starting from scratch. I had to do what I wanted, but I had to explain to them the reason why I was doing it, and also what would happen if they stuck to the principles that I was teaching them.
Also, a bit of a World Cup final loss, a devastating World Cup final loss against New Zealand in 2011.
That's right. Yeah, that was my final game with the French team. Yeah.
Was that in New Zealand?
Yeah, that was at Eden Park. Yeah,
Was it 8-7?
8-7. Yeah.
That's
Gosh.
tight,
Yeah.
especially for Union
with
when there's so many drop
some
goals
very
and-
dubious refereeing decisions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
But that's rugby union, isn't it? I mean, in rugby union, what appear to be very pedantic refereeing decisions can often have a massive, massive effect on the final results.
Yeah.
It's quite amazing.
But you spent a bit of time with the All Blacks at one stage in your career, didn't you?
That's right. It's very interesting now, because they're talking about Sean Edwards. Perhaps he might be going with the British Lions, and a similar sort of thing happened in 2005. France had won the Grand Slam in 2002, 2004, and so it was a big call for me to go on the Lions tour in 2005. Clive Woodward was asked the question, and he said that I didn't come up to the levels required, so he decided to take Phil Larder and Mike Ford as defensive coaches. Then the morning after that appeared in the press, I got a phone call from not Jack Gibson but Graham Henry this time, And he said to me, and I didn't know him. I knew Wayne Smith, who was a
Graham Henry was the new All Blacks coach.
That's correct. He was the head coach of the All Blacks. Yeah. And I knew Wayne Smith, who was assistant coach, who had cross swords with occasionally when he coached at Northampton. And Wayne Smith had given Graham Henry my number, so he rang me and he says, you'd be disappointed about not getting on the Lions tour. And I says, yeah, but, And he says, do you fancy coming working for the enemy? I said, I work for the enemy anyway. He said, no. He said, do you fancy coming to work for the All Blacks? And then I just didn't hesitate. I said, yeah. That was it. Yeah. And I flew out a couple of days later and spent a few weeks out there working with the coaches really intensely. And well, we got it right. Three tests to 0, some record scores, and record amount of tries that the All Blacks scored in a Lions series. And
did you ever speak to Clive Woodward about that series afterwards?
No. Yeah. And my brother, well, you know Kevin quite well. My brother actually made me a T-shirt, and he said, "You got to wear this when you come home." So it was a T-shirt when I come, and it said, "British Lions 2005 tour, the Lion Tamer."
Brilliant.
That's awesome. Yeah. And you also work with a number of Premiership rugby clubs, a number of top 14 clubs as well. What were some of the clubs you worked with?
Started off with racing.
Yeah.
Then I went to Bordeaux. And then Philippe Saint-André was a French player. He got the coaching job at Gloucester, so I came. I was asked to come back to Gloucester to work with him. Philippe Saint-André stayed for a year, and then Nigel Melville, a fellow Yorkshireman, he took over the club, and I stayed at Gloucester for 5 years. Right. And then went back to France with Castres Olympique for 2 years, and then to Brive for 2 years. I always went with. The Jack Gibson scenario, never stay longer than 3 years.
No.
So once he always said to me, he says, when the job's done, get out of there.
Yeah.
So 2 years, job was done. 2 years, job was done. Came to London Irish. We made the semi-finals of the Heineken Cup. And, had a fantastic couple of years. Job was done, and I moved on.
Yeah, well, yeah. And I guess talk us through what you're doing now. You're more of a consultant-based sort of defensive coach. You're doing some work with the schools at the moment.
Yeah, I do. Not just with rugby union. Do it with rugby league in sort of public schools. A lot of the local schools in Yorkshire, universities, and and go back to France, working with clubs over there as well.
Yeah, wow.
The good thing for me is that a lot of the players that I coached are now coaches. So when they want advice, then they'll come to me.
You're there, Jack Gibson.
That's it. Yes. And it's really good because I can do what John Sheridan did back in the day. I can go sit with them in a grandstand and watch the game, and I can sort of, that's going to happen. We need to do this, that, and help them with their career.
Yeah.
How long does it take to develop that skill to be able to sit there and almost read a play before it happens, or see what's leading up to it?
Well, I think what you've got to do, it's got everything you watch on TV has not got to be particular rugby league or rugby union. You've got to watch sport. I quite enjoy watching football now, seeing the tactical side of football. My granddaughter, she's a very good football, and sometimes we watch the games, and I'm learning things off her about the tactics of football.
Yes.
And I think in time, well, you see lots of young coaches have always got the notebooks making notes. Well, when you don't need that, then you get into the right level where you can sort of. But it takes years and years of intense watching the game and understanding the game. Yeah.
Just a quick thing. I mean, you were involved with Paris Saint-Germain, as you've said, in 1996. I always think back to that time, David, and think what a gigantic missed opportunity that was for rugby league. The club lasted 2 years. It changed dramatically from 96 to 97. It became Australianised, you might say.
Yeah, that's correct,
with Peter Mulholland, and and then it closed down after 2 years. It's a typical rugby league thing. It started brilliantly with about 18,000 people in the Charletti Stadium for that first match against Sheffield. A brilliant win for Paris Saint-Germain, and yet from that point it was rather than capitalising on what had happened, it was downhill all the way, wasn't it?
Yeah, and I think what you have to look at there is that was the season, the Super League season, where the French players, and biggest part of the players that played in the first season in Paris Saint-Germain were French players or French-based players. They just come out of a winter season straight into a summer season without a break. So what they did was unbelievable to stay in the league. I think it was Workington. Workington that got relegated. The second season they got it all wrong because I think there was only either one or two French players and all the players were living in a hotel in Paris. Whereas they should have been based in the south of France, and the games could have been played in Paris. That's not a problem because of the travel system, the train system in France. Wouldn't be any problem to getting from a training base in France to play in Paris, and go through the process, which to a certain extent the Catalan Dragons have done in recruiting and sort of developing young players to play in that team, and it could have been a really good long-term process.
Oh yeah. Still not enough young French players in the Catalans team.
No.
You know that's still too heavily based on NRL stars who are coming to the end of their careers.
Yeah. And the thing with the Catalan Dragons, what they are doing is, if you look at the strength, the power base in French Rugby League at the moment, it's all based around Perpignan, Carcassonne, Limoux, and that area, and Lesignan. They're the teams that win it all the time. They're all within an hour of each other or less.
Yes.
And there's now the shrinking. Well, Toulouse is still involved, but now the west of Toulouse is nothing. Villeneuve are now at the bottom of the table, and I've been there for a decade.
They used to be very
more.
strong, didn't they?
Yeah. So there's nothing over to the west. I think that you got Perpignan on the coast, and it's great. I go to the games quite often down there, Canet Plage, and you see loads of supporters going. It's fantastic. And I've been to Toulouse as well. It's a shame there's not one in Bordeaux. Have a third club. Then you've got good organisation throughout and good development throughout the south of France.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's waiting for somebody to sort it out, isn't it, really?
Yeah.
With whether that will ever happen, goodness only knows. But let's just move on. You wrote an article in this week's League Express, David, about... it was an article encouraging people in the game to focus, particularly with young people, on good tackling technique.
Yeah.
Basically to avoid the problems that have come to the fore in recent years with, the impact of concussion, particularly on former players' later lives. You're very strong on this, aren't you? I mean, you were saying in the article that, you've tested yourself to see, because you obviously had some concussions during your playing career. But do you see much sign that people are educating young kids to, tackle with the right technique?
Not really, no.
Don't you?
No. And I think what I do is I don't turn up at training sessions and announce who I am. I'll just turn up at training session, watch from a distance, with the baseball hat on and the big coat, and just look, because I was always looking out for coaches that are talented coaches that I can help throughout their career. And I go around, people will talk about certain coaches, I'll go watch them, and some of the coaching that they're doing is straight out the coaching manual or straight out of something off the scene of TV. Getting young kids tackling up here on the ball when there's about a foot in difference between the ball carrier. It just doesn't make any sense. So I'm a big believer in that. What they did, something interesting they brought out in France several years ago. There were quite a few people in rugby union getting badly injured and paralysed in scrummaging. So what they did, they brought a front row licence out. So you had to go through many different scenarios of scrummaging. This, we're talking about kids, so they could understand the techniques of scrummaging. Now, after doing that, and I think it's been going now for probably 15 years. Now there's very, very rarely any injuries in scrummaging, and in France, in rugby union, that's something they're real big on. And I think that something brought in, particular at school level, because you get lots of parents worried about their children playing at rugby at school, are they going to get concussions? Are they going to get injured? Well, if we can put some sort of protocol in where the children have to go through it, and in the article I mentioned about right shoulders and left shoulders, I've coached international players that have over 50 caps for the country that can only tackle with one shoulder. And I think if we can educate the children, they're not going to be 100% proficient on both shoulders, but if they're capable, if someone runs on their weak shoulder, if they're capable of making a tackle, even if it's a passive tackle, then we're saving people from injury later in life.
Absolutely. So do you think, because there's been a bit of a move lately to delay when we start introducing contact into juniors, do you think earlier the better, so we can sort of teach those fundamentals from a young age?
Yeah. My son, I taught my son to tackle when he was 4-year-old. Just the technique. Tackling cushions in the living room and things like that. When he went out on the field, and with him, he was capable of tackling on either shoulder, because not was I doing it to make him a better player, but I was doing it for his health as well,
to make it safer. Yeah.
And in your playing days, mate, do you feel like most of the concussions you experienced or your teammates experienced, do you think it was more when a tackle goes badly rather than being the ball carrier? I know for me, growing up, like a lot of my head knocks was from just getting my head in the wrong position.
I think the biggest thing is, particularly today, is that people getting their head in the wrong position. And if someone, if you're right-handed, someone runs on your left shoulder, your first movement you're going to make is to go like that.
Yeah, get your head. Yeah, so you can tackle with your right.
Tackle with your good shoulder. What we need to do is players. We go through every training session, and every player will pass the ball to his right, to his left. But not every training session we tackle them right and left.
No.
I know, like, for me growing up, it was always, you can't run without legs, tackle around the legs, tackle around the legs. And then I got to about like under 13s, under 14s, and that was sort of around that Melbourne Storm wrestle period where NRL teams were getting wrestling coaches in, 2 up high and then the third man chopped the legs, that sort of style. That was when we started to see that rapid sort of change. Do you have to have different approaches, do you think, as a defensive coach for how you teach union juniors versus league juniors with, I guess, the wrestle that's involved in league now?
Not really, because I think what you've got to do is start from fundamentals. Start, whichever, whether it's league or union, start them tackling around the ankles. And then they can progress to the knees and the hips. And once you give them all the tools that are in the box, they can decide what they want to do themselves. If you don't give them all the tools, then something's going to break down. And that's the important thing for me. I work out with young kids, 11-year-old, that are just coming to the game, and they've just been introduced to contact at some of the schools are working, and I just pull people out of training, and I said, I'm sorry, you're going to hurt yourself tackling like that. Come over to one side, I'll take him over one side and work on his technique, and he's got to come back week after week until he's competent to go back in. And I think it's just important.
When you're watching Rugby League, say Super League, David, how many players do you see on the field now who still can't tackle with both shoulders? Do you watch out for that?
I think it's a lot less evident in Rugby League because of the fact that you've got two players going high. In certain situations when people are carrying ball in straight lines, then it's a lot less. But when it's a one-on-one situation, particularly on an edge, then you'll find it quite often then. And that's one of the things I mentioned about the left-handers or the right-handers. When you're organising your defensive team, it's no good having like if I'm left-handed and you're right-handed, it's no good us defending together. But if we swap us over, because we'll have a weak spot, if the swap is over, we've got a strong spot. Okay? Yeah. And that's the sort of thing that you've always got to know the weak points of players. You've got to help them progress in them weak points, but you've also, when you're organising your defensive structures, you've got to put these things in place where you've got strong areas as opposed to weak areas.
That's a fascinating point you made, because we look at some of the athletes out there that had those ambidextrous sort of qualities. For instance, in basketball, LeBron James, he shoots with his right hand, but he's a left-hander. He writes with his left hand. One of the greatest players of all time. think you mentioned, is it Johnny Wilkinson?
Yeah.
Could kick field goals both feet.
He has done.
Yeah.
So something
one,
to be said about that.
And one guy that you remember from my student days coaching at Loughborough University, Roger Draper.
Oh, yes.
Roger's son, Jack Draper.
Yes.
He's right-handed and he plays tennis left-handed.
Really?
And it's the only thing he does with his left hand.
Well, why does he do that? Do you know?
Because he feels really comfortable doing it.
Yeah.
And it's just exactly what you're saying about, people in sport finding something that they're capable of doing with either hands. It's possible to do, and it's something that he did. I think they had him when he was a youngster, because I remember when he was a little kid playing, he used to play two-handed, and he just hit a ball one day with his left hand, and he says, I feel comfortable, so that's what he does now.
That's amazing, isn't it? Yeah.
I think from a young age too, it's probably something you could teach, because I played a bit of Aussie rules as well, and they were really encouraging us to kick with both feet, because it's integral in that sport, which is a hard thing to get used to when you've been kicking with one foot for most of your life. But I think if you get them at a young age, it's not that hard to rewire.
No.
And it's exactly what I said in the article about when I went to see the Toronto Blue Jays, their baseball. It's throwing the ball tremendous speed, throwing it, catching it, putting it in the other hand, throwing it back. So they're throwing right-handed and left-handed, catching right-handed and left-handed with unbelievable accuracy and speed.
That's sensational.
Yeah.
So there's been a few changes with tackle height and that sort of thing. Do you think they are the right moves to be making to, I guess, get people away from making those high tackles? Yeah,
without a doubt. I mean, when I first started playing, can you remember Tony Fisher?
Yeah, oh God.
Well, Tony when he was playing at Castleford, and I was a young teenager, and the first thing he taught me was that when you pass the ball, protect your head. So I had to sort of lift my arm up, and I said, why would I want to do that? And he says it'll alter things. And he says if you protect yourself, you'll be okay. So as we're playing touch and pass at warm up, I passed the ball, forgot to lift my arm, boom, came straight over the top. And he picked me up off the floor, and he said, "Remember what I said." So, But in them days, it was different. The high tackles, and some of the, when you watch some of them on the video now, Les Boyd against Darryl Broman and people like that, it makes you cringe. But no, I think it's. I don't think there's a problem. I think the referees have got to be sensible about it as well.
Yeah.
People that don't do things on not now, these days, they don't do things on a purpose. If they do, they deserve sending off. But if they get it wrong, does it really merit a red card? And, the interesting thing in Rugby Union for the Six Nations, they brought in the 20-minute red card.
That's... were you going to say something?
That's really interesting. They are making some interesting decisions in Rugby Union. Do you think that's a good move, to bring in a 20-minute red card? I mean, I'm not sure about it.
No, it can be if you. It just depends what kind of coach you are. You can actually use it. You could go back to the old days of the enforcers, knowing full fact that an enforcer is going to end up getting a red card, but someone else can come on and replace him if he's off at the end. It's complicated. You've got to be really careful with it.
Yes.
And I think to trial it out is important because I think in Rugby Union. I think it's a lot less in Rugby League. In Rugby Union, use one of the key players in your team, key positional players. Then it can have a really bad effect on the way you're performing.
And that sort of, I guess, leads to have you seen the talk in Australia at the moment about the proposed HIA sin bin changes that they might be making? I think if a player's gone off the field due to a head knock caused by an illegal defending act, if that player does not pass the HIA, the offender will be sent off for 10 minutes.
Right.
So let's just say, there's a high tackle, player goes off for a HIA, then
but the player making the tackle doesn't go off straight away.
Not straight away, they stay on the field, and then if he gets ruled out, then that player has to come off from then for 10 minutes.
Yes, right, okay.
Which is, I think that's an interesting concept, because let's just say you're getting towards the end of the match, it's a tight match, maybe a field goal in it, and Daly Cherry Evans, for instance, high tackles someone, the player comes off. Does the coaching staff, do they then say, no, he's failed his HIA, just so they can bring Daly Cherry Evans off and take him away as a field goal threat? So that's a tactical side that could be
it could be
manipulated,
exploited.
I guess.
Could be exploited.
You've also got the situation where someone does get hit off the ball, the guy gets sent 10 minutes in the bin, and this guy gets up and carries on playing.
That's the thing, they're trying to crack down on diving and things like that.
So should he automatically, if this guy gets sin bin, should he automatically have to go off for
like a mandatory?
Because if he stays on and he kicks a winning field goal,
yeah, that's right. I think that there has been a lot of talk about trying to get that diving out of the game as well. So,
I mean, the rule makers have always got to try and keep one step ahead of the coaches, haven't they? You know, the coaches are the best people in the world at exploiting rule changes for their own benefit, and you know, that's the job, part of the job.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
It's not surprising that it is.
Yeah.
Just a quick one, Dave. I mean, obviously you've had a tremendous career in rugby union, in coaching. Would you describe yourself as still a rugby league guy at heart?
Oh yeah, without a doubt.
Yeah, really.
Yeah, I'm not a great fan of Super League, unfortunately.
Why not?
I think once you've been to Australia and you've seen the game over there, and now we're capable of watching live games on TV. I watch the NRL as much as I can. Yeah. I think the skill level is far better. What we do is that what we tend to do is we tend to, in the UK, we have robotic type players. The ball handling forward seems to have disappeared out of the game altogether. You know, where there still exists in Australia, you've still got some really good ball handling forwards that are allowed to offload and do things like that.
Why is that though? Why have if ball handling forwards are a dying breed? Why is that? I
think what they've gone is, with teams have gone for percentages and completions and things like that, and to a certain extent the risk has been taken out of the game. You know, people want to see.
We need to bring risk back into it. Don't we?
Exactly. Yeah. And what you're doing is that, you know, I'm uncovering players that have gone through the system at academies that I'm working with now. Gone through a system at academies in rugby league that are told not to pass the ball because you're a big boy, you carry.
Yeah,
I'm just trying to think now in the Super League of some of the ball playing forwards. I think the only one I can really think off the top of my head is John Asiata, but he's come from the Australian NRL system. So. And
to a certain extent as well, it's happening in Australia, but it's happening not with the forwards, it's happening with the halfbacks. The ball playing halfbacks are. Where are they now? Where's the new breed coming through?
That's it. We always talk about there seems to be a bit of a shortage of halfbacks, and you're seeing halfbacks last longer in the game and getting paid big money, like Ben Hunt, Cherry Evans. They're the most dominant. Nathan Cleary's probably the exception to the rule. But yeah.
One of the problems with rugby league is that if all teams adopt that sort of conservative way of playing, minimising passing and so on, and playing out the six tackles and kicking it and and so on and so forth, the game becomes much less exciting. And you'd think ultimately that might be a threat to it, wouldn't you? Because people want, at the end of the day, the majority of rugby league fans love nothing more than to see tries scored from a long distance, to see passing movements. You know, they don't want to see. They don't want to see a prop forward just taking the ball in necessarily on 3, 4, 5 successive tackles. They want ball movement, and they want to see excitement and the thrill of the chase, so to speak.
Or scoring tries from kicks alone. The amount of tries that are scored from kicks. Even in the NRL, certain teams do it. Just kick. And there are good players contesting. You know, I know a lot of that is to do with the quality of the defence. But I just look back to the 80s when there was the Canterbury Bankstown Bulldogs and the grand finals 8-6 and things. And all of a sudden, Wayne Bennett, the Brisbane Broncos, exploded everything out of the water by playing a brand of football that was Steve Renouf on the outside and players just playing an expansive game. You know, I think we need to have some of the back. It's still possible to do that.
I was going to say, how would you actually try and manage the game to bring that sort of attractive football into it, to make sure that there was a great deal of ball movement that excited the fans and so on? Would you tinker with some rules, or would you Well, because without doing that, it's hard to see how you would how you'd achieve that objective, isn't it?
Well, I think that the situation, you've got the situation in the game where when you've got the 40-20 kick in the game, that you've got the situation where you've got two players already in backfield. And I think that the opportunities that once you do that, if you bring it further back, can you kick into the opposition 22 from anywhere on the field? Okay, and I know we've got kickers that can do it. Then the opportunity is to playing down in the wide channels and just move the ball wide. And I think it's just a case of taking risks, putting risks back into the game. Instead of, if we complete 90%, then we're going to win the game, or we should win the game. Whereas, offloads, bring the offloads back into the game. The players are capable of offloading. One recently, one player that died a few weeks ago, Brian Lockwood, was a prime example.
Yeah,
he played really good with Canterbury Bankstown and Balmain, and I mean his career with Castleford and Hull Kingston Rovers, and
delight to watch, wasn't he, Brian?
Yeah, just a good man as well. So them sort of players, okay, we still need them in the game, and if the forwards are offloading the ball, one thing that you look at the success of the French rugby union team now, okay? You look at the success of Toulouse, which most of the players for the French rugby union team play for. What is their success? It's not Antoine Dupont. It's having forwards like Julien Marchand, Cyril Bay. They're big fans of Rugby League. Cyril Bay, big prop forward, great scrummager. His offload skills are unbelievable. When you watch a lot of the French rugby union tries scored in the opposition 40 metres, will inevitably start from one of his offloads. Once he does that, he breaks the opposition's defence, and then the speed comes into the game.
Yeah, so true. Just quickly, in terms of rugby union talent at the moment, if we were to try and poach a rugby union player to come play either Super League or NRL, who do you think would transition well?
Well, I think there's lots. I think you look at the back line, the whole back line that Toulouse have got, or the back line in general that French have got. Penaud, the winger plays with the French team, but I think most of the wingers, most of the backs, Ramos playing fullback for France, and most of these are brought up in a system which is run by one of the players and coaches I worked with in the past, Hugo Mola. His philosophy is playing. It's his play. Just play to space, and just move and keep the ball moving. And once you've got movement in the game and pace in the game, and it's spectacular. And I think that's what we're missing. I still think in rugby league we've got the players to do it. We just got to let them off the leash.
Yeah,
absolutely. No, you've said a lot of great things there. I think I agree with most of them. Martyn, how about you? Yeah, a lot of agreement.
Yeah.
Should we touch on, we got the Challenge Cup action, or is there anything else you'd like to touch on with David's career before?
Well, I think we've covered a lot of aspects of David's career. It's been absolutely fascinating to get David's views on all this. I just hope that one or two people from the RFL are watching, because David's got some interesting points to make that they ought to take on board. But yeah, we ought to talk about the Challenge Cup, because it's the third round this weekend. We've got 16 matches, 3 on Friday, I think, is it 6 on Saturday and 7 coming up on Sunday. And it's the round where all the 12 Super League clubs have been drawn away from home, at least in theory, so as to avoid each other and to, visit the Championship and League One clubs. So there are one or two fixtures to pick out, Jake, actually, and we've got a reader's poll this week that asks, where will this, if there will be a shock, where will it come? And the one that's leading the way, not too surprisingly, is Bradford Bulls versus Castleford Tigers. Bradford are, I think, clearly going to be the standout side in the Championship this year, and Castleford have, not had a great start in terms of their pre-season games. Lost at Wakefield, lost at home to Hull. So, if there is going to be an upset, I think that's where it will be. And I'm sure that the Bradford fans will be coming out in force to, cheer on their side, hopefully, to doing that. Whereas the the Tigers fans, of course, will be there hoping it doesn't happen. Yeah. And it shouldn't really, because a Super League club should beat a Championship club, but you never know.
That's it. And that one can be viewed, it'll be on BBC.
BBC iPlayer at 1 o'clock on Sunday, yeah.
They've done a good job picking that game.
Yeah. Brian Noble coaching Bradford, of course.
Yeah, I think the buzz with Brian Noble going back there, and the buzz in general about the amount of sponsors getting back involved in the club.
That's right. That's right.
I think it's really good.
The other interesting game is York Knights versus Hull KR, because, of course, York beat Hull KR in Amsterdam a couple of weeks ago, didn't they, in that pre-season game? It wasn't a full-strength Hull KR side, so let's not get too carried away by that result. But nonetheless, I think that's going to be a great game. That's on Friday night, kicking off at 8 o'clock, and that game will be shown on the Sportsman website, so you will be able to watch that game at home if you would like to do so. And I think York, they absolutely hammered Keighley in the Challenge Cup, 72 points to 12 at Cougar Park on Sunday. And you've got to say, I think York, we had Clint Goodchild on this podcast a couple of weeks ago, and a lot of people were very impressed by what he said. And I think, York is a club definitely on the up, isn't it?
No, most certainly. And it'll be interesting to see, I guess, what team Salford fields with. We haven't really had an update on this takeover, so are they going to field a weakened side, do you think, just in case they might have to cut a few players before Super League season
Well, if Salford don't complete the takeover before their game against Midlands Hurricanes, which is due to be played on Sunday, then they will probably play a very weakened side that falls within that 1.2 million salary cap. So I think if the takeover isn't completed in the next day or two, that's what will happen. But I think they'll be confident of beating them anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. But as we said last week, the clock is ticking ahead of the Super League season start.
Absolutely. The other interesting game to pick out, Jake, is Goole Vikings versus Wakefield Trinity, which has actually been switched to Bellevue, Wakefield's stadium, because the Goole Stadium is still being worked on so that they can play their league games there. But Goole winning at London Broncos in round 2, result of the round, really, for their first ever official professional game. Have you followed that? What they've been doing at Goole?
Yeah.
Scott Taylor coaching.
Scott Taylor coaching. There's a few players come from Hull FC as well, and it's a hotbed of rugby league players around that area.
Yeah,
I don't think they'll beat Wakefield, obviously, but it'll be an interesting experience for them. And I think Goole Vikings are going to be quite a competitive League One side this year. There won't be anybody's easy win, will there? I don't think.
No, and I'm just thankful to have action back on TV. Mate.
Yes.
Fingers crossed. I can get to a game this weekend. We'll have to wait and see.
Absolutely.
But do you think, some of the clubs, they're set to benefit greatly from?
Hopefully so. You'd like to think so. Whitehaven versus Warrington. Hopefully Warrington will take quite a lot of fans up to Whitehaven. And by the way, have you seen that they've renamed their stadium for the first home game of the Super League competition? Going to call it the Luke Littler Stadium.
Yeah.
For one game, Luke Littler is going to be the star guest on that day. He's a keen Warrington Wolves fan, of course, and that young man has just shot to fame, hasn't he?
Oh, yeah.
In the last few months, and good luck to him. He's an incredible darts player. There's no doubt about that.
What a great asset that is for not only Warrington but Super League as a whole. He's on that world platform. He can really shine some light on our competition.
Absolutely, yeah.
All right, mate. Anything else you want to touch on before we get out of here today, Martyn?
No, I think that's just about everything. Obviously, we'd like to thank Dave for joining us, and it's been an absolutely fascinating discussion, Dave, and I hope you've enjoyed joining us.
Very much so,
and, you'd be welcome again, sort of further down the track, of course. So just wish you good luck with your future coaching career. Hopefully it goes on a long time into the future, and thanks, Jake, to you. We'll be back next week.
Absolutely. Are you quite busy at the moment, David? Is there a way people can get in touch with you if they want to, get a hold of your services, mate? I'm not sure how big your diary is.
Oh, and always make room for something. Yeah. Anybody that wants to get in touch can get in touch.
You got a Facebook page or a website or anything like that, or
no, not really. No. Look, I'm on LinkedIn, so people get in through LinkedIn, but I'm not really good with all the social media.
No, don't waste your time.
I just don't have time for it, really. So.
No.
It can be quite the distraction sometimes, that's for sure.
Yeah.
All right, David, well, thanks heaps for joining us, mate. It's been a pleasure having you on.
Cheers, Martyn.
And we'll do it again next week, Martyn.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Thanks.